Mario and I are here in this wonderful room at the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. It's called the AJC. And this is where Jung was a professor and lectured here for about 10 years in the 1930s, 1933 to 1941, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it was probably in this hall that he lectured.
We talked in English, so there's a big audience, and it was sort of stenographed.
Yeah, in the front row there were a number of people making notes. Jung had his biggest audience in Zurich, at least. This was a major location. Everybody called him Professor Jung because he had a position here.
It was called the Pelzmantel audience, with the fur coats.
The fur coats. The Pelzmantel,
The fur coats used to come from Zurich,
from the Zurich Berg.
Class in Zurich. Educated higher class.
We'll look around the ATH a little bit, and it's a very famous, sort of the equivalent in the United States of MIT or Caltech, one of these great technical universities. When did you become a Jungian analyst, Mario?
I actually made the diploma in 56.
56,
but before I was already 9 years at the institute because I had the same time to do the university. I was a musician before, and of course they say we cannot take musicians, you have to have an academic degree. So I went just because I wanted to be an analyst. I went to the university to get a degree in psychology, in pedagogics, and so forth, history of religion.
Oh, yes.
So all together it took me about 9 years, but at the same time I had also to earn my living with giving lessons, violin lessons. And playing in orchestra. I played at the Tonhalle orchestra and so forth, and there's a little chamber ensemble I played where we toured. That's the first time I came to the United States with that little orchestra. It was a chamber orchestra, and at the time the manager said, chamber orchestra, no one wants to hear that. Let's tell it Swiss little symphony. So we were the Swiss little symphony.
You were in analysis with a famous Jungian of the first generation.
Yes.
Yolanda Jacobi, same name. Were you related to her?
No, she used to say, "You are my psychische Sohn."
Psychic son.
But
you spell your name slightly differently too, I think.
She was always jealous about my Y I have in the end, because she's from Hungary, and in Hungary only nobility is allowed as a Y, and she had just an I.
So we're standing in front of Federal Institute of Technology, ATH, a famous institution in Switzerland. It's a federal university. It's where Jung was a professor in the 1930s. Wolfgang Pauli was here.
Yes.
Einstein was a student here.
Probably, yes.
1912, I think.
Yes.
He and Jung had a lunch one time.
You tell me new things.
I tell you new things.
Cool.
You met Jung one time, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. When I came to the institute, of course, I was just beginning, I had no idea of all this, but Jung was ill. But one day they said, Jung wants now to make a discussion afternoon with the students. But he wanted that we prepare or already send him some questions. So in order to answer this question, so it was very interesting because Jung sitting there the first time, I had really the impression of the living Jung.
The real Jung.
Sitting there, and at the fantasy, now he sits there and his legs go down in the underworld of the unconscious. And, this kind of fantasies came to your mind if you saw him, met him, but he was very, you could only talk like that. He had no voice anymore because he was 80-something, 82, 83. But he was very alive. And it was very interesting. He never answered those questions. He just began
Just
talking. But what he did was all to somehow loosen up all these fixed terms, animal, and so forth, was had already been fixed at the institute. That means this, and Yolanda Jacobi at the exams. What does it mean? What does animals mean? What does persona mean? And for him, I could have also chosen other names for it, but it was so. Yeah.
So you really got impressions
Yeah.
from the man.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. So I think it is important to hear these stories about Jung the man, because
Yes.
one has such an impression of him as almost a superhuman figure.
Superhuman figure, and he wanted to be that, but he did not want to be that, of course. You know, that's really Jung wants and does not want, because the opposites
Yeah.
are really, of course, to bring them together somehow, but that is really his main theory, his main thinking of the opposites. So it was very interesting that he wants something, he wants the applause, he wants, it was incredible when he arrived, this idealization. Oh, Professor Jung, and so forth.
He enjoyed it anyway. a little
But
bit.
at the same time he enjoyed it, of course. And he even admitted it, he was quite conscious
I
about it.
think he knew he was a great man, don't you
He
think?
knew, of course, he knew, and he was not, he was, he was greater than Freud, he thought, because when Freud left off, he began, that was his idea,
He went
And
further with Freud.
yes, and he was very sad towards the end of his life that he felt he had continued Freud, but they don't want to listen, not enough people want to listen if he would know the success he had afterwards. But at that time he was quite depressed.
At that time,
He said
Freudians were everywhere.
Freud and everywhere, and his is not really recognized, especially not by academics.
Yeah, that was a big problem.
Yeah, and there are many letters of this, and that he really was dissatisfied and depressed towards the end of his life. It's sad, yeah.
So, but don't you think that he also he knew that his psychology somehow was for the future? It wasn't received yet, and there is nowadays a kind of convergence coming. A lot of the new developments in psychoanalysis are not so far from his
Not
ideas.
far at all, and everything which new has always some similarity with Jung's ideas at the time, 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
No?
So now there are new developments in psychoanalysis.
It's,
He was saying,
approaching Jung, we could say.
finally
Of
it
course,
took
they left
60
out
years.
this whole religious and mystical and so forth. That is always left out. But his psychological ideas, these ideas about practice and so forth, it gets nearer and nearer. Yeah?
And don't you think the religious part and the spiritual part will come in too
It
slowly?
will come slowly. It
they
will
start
come
coming into
out, start
psychoanalysis
coming
too.
in. I was at the conference of self-psychology, and they had the whole religious, psycho-religious section.
Yeah. So it's beginning to...
Beginning, yes, that they take this serious, because Freud was a religious atheist. I would say religious atheist.
Religious atheist.
It was very strong.
It's
religious, yeah.
How many books have you written? What was the first book? How did they unfold?
I mean, the very first book was on the idea of the paradise, longing for paradise.
Longing for Paradise, yeah.
And of course, books, I think if you, the motivation to write books can of course have many different
Sources,
courses and so forth. And for me, usually, if I write a book, it has something to do with my own longings, longing for paradise. Longings. How do I long for paradise? It's true. When I was young, my mother left for for Palestine, and I've been raised with an uncle and the aunt was a little borderline, and so forth, so forth. So the whole idea of paradise and the symbol of it and so forth, it was somehow a longing. It was really affecting me personal, and I don't think so much of the public or what, whether it will be success and then whatever and so forth. It's very important that you write something what you feel is up for your own personal life. Then after that, I think was the Transference.
The book on
the book on Transference is the therapeutic relationship, and that was
the therapeutic encounter.
The therapeutic encounter, and that is the book which has most success. I mean, it's about 7 or 8 translations and every this little book, but it was actually, there were lectures, and I was always interested in interaction and in intersubjectivity, and it was a great satisfaction to share this with the people who listened, or with people at the institute, with students and so forth and so forth. Because one has to say that Jung was great, and he talked a lot about transference. I mean, he did not talk a lot of. He wrote that book.
Yeah.
But that book, I think, is one of the very, very deep and interesting books, The Psychology of Transference. But I think it's more about individuation than about transference. No, it's more the inner.
It's very hard to use that book.
Hard to use. It's more about the inner. Intrapsychic, and the other gets forgotten, and that is a little the danger of. I mean, I think that Jung is great, but that part is not really his strong side, or not well developed. And I tried, of course, to bring something in from that side. So it was quite new, it seems, and so forth. So it had a great success, and all the languages and so forth. That was the second book, and the third, I think, was on narcissism.
The narcissism book, yeah.
Narcissism and human psychology. When I got to know Kohut, not personally, he was already sick, and at the time. I never met him. I just saw in psychoanalytic journal sort of works of Kohut. That is really what just agrees with my way of thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
And so I thought, but how is it, and at the same time, it's very, very near to what Jung.
Yeah.
No. So I thought,
Even
just
the terminology, the
terminology
self,
and so forth. So I thought it's very interesting and important for me to understand what are the similarities and the differences and the differentiations and also it was connections, and also clinically, because of course Jung had very little clinical material, but Kohut is mainly a clinician. Apart from this, and so it was something which really suited me. Also, I wanted to understand better, and in order to understand it, you usually to write a book, then you have to kind of in a differentiated way to try to understand.
That's a very important book, and for bridging from the
Jungian
to self-psychology.
To self-psychology for others. For me, it was in the beginning just for me to understand better. And then the third, the fourth, that was on shame.
On shame, yes.
Shame and anxiety. Shame, anxiety. I call it shame, anxiety.
The issue of shame is very much connected to the narcissism
Very
problem.
much connected to the narcissism problem and to the whole inferiority complex, and you have so many patients, and then the patient I myself also, so I had to somehow to find material and so forth. All these books helped me in my own development and my development on being a therapist and so forth.
Thinking your way ahead through these books.
Yes. And then the really last one so far it was when I came across Daniel Stern. Somebody brought me the idea Daniel Stern. It's a must. You have to read Daniel Stern if you are interested in infants and development and so forth. So I did read Daniel Stern. I said, oh, that's also, you know,
Yeah.
you can really, that it begins in the baby, the whole process of individuation begins already in the baby. There are so many things which Jung saw, just, you know, had ideas about it and so forth. Now, to really follow it up in the baby, what Stern wrote and so forth, and what others wrote, and the whole science at the time, you know. So that was the last one, and that brought me also a lot of insights into, I think every book I had for myself the advantage to train myself for more sensitivity for what's going on between two people with the client. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Mario and I are here in this wonderful room at the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. It's called the AJC. And this is where Jung was a professor and lectured here for about 10 years in the 1930s, 1933 to 1941, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it was probably in this hall that he lectured.
We talked in English, it had a big audience, and it was sort of stenographed.
Yeah, in the front row there were a number of people making notes. And Jung had his biggest audience in Zurich, at least. And this was a major location. Everybody called him Professor Jung because he had a position here.
It was called the Pelzmantel audience, you know, with the fur coat.
The fur coats. Pelzmantel,
The fur coat used to come from Zurich,
from the Zurich
class in Zurich. Educated higher class.
We'll look around the ETH a little bit, and it's a very famous, sort of the equivalent in the United States of MIT or Caltech, one of these great technical universities. Okay. When did you become a Jungian analyst, Mario?
I actually made the diploma in 56. 1956, but before I was already 9 years at the institute because I had the same time to do the university. I was a musician before, and of course they say we cannot take musicians, you have to have an academic degree. So I went just because I wanted to be an analyst. I went to the university to get a degree in psychology, in pedagogics, and so forth, history of religion.
Oh, yes.
So all together, it took me about 9 years, but I, at the same time, I had also to earn my living with giving lessons, violin lessons.
Violin lessons.
And playing in orchestra. I played at the Tonhalle orchestra and so forth. And there's a little chamber ensemble I played where we toured. It's the first time I came to the United States with that little orchestra. It was a chamber orchestra, and at the time the manager said, "Oh, chamber orchestra, no one wants to hear that. Let's tell it Swiss little symphony." So we were the Swiss little symphony.
You were in analysis with a famous Jungian of the first generation.
Yes.
Yolanda Jacobi, same name. Were you related to her?
No, she used to say, "You are my psychischer Sohn."
Psychic
son.
But you spell your name slightly differently too, I think.
She was always jealous about why I have in the end, because she's from Hungary, and in Hungary only nobility is allowed as a Y, and she had just the I.
So we're standing in front of the Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, a famous institution in Switzerland. It's a federal university. It's where Jung was a professor in the 1930s. Wolfgang Pauli was here. Einstein was a student here.
Probably, yes.
1912, I think.
Yes.
He
Yeah.
and Jung had a lunch one time.
Ah, yeah? Yes, you tell me new
I
things.
tell you new things.
Cool.
You met Jung one time, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. When I came to the institute, of course, I was just beginning, I had no idea of all this, but Jung was ill. But one day they said, Jung wants now to make a discussion afternoon with the students. But he wanted that we prepare or already send him some questions. So in order to answer this question, so it was very interesting because Jung sitting there the first time, I had really the impression of the living Jung.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, the real Jung.
sitting there, and at the fantasy, and now he sits there and his legs go down, down, down in the underworld of the unconscious. And so, this kind of fantasies came to your mind if you saw him, met him, but he was very, you could only talk like that. He had no voice anymore because he was 80 something, 82, 82. But he was very alive. And it was very interesting. He never answered those questions. He just began talking. But what he did was all to somehow loosen up all these fixed terms, animal, and so forth, was had already been fixed at the institute. That means this, and Yolanda Jacobi at the exams. What does it mean? What does animus mean? What does persona mean? And for him, I could have also chosen other names for it, but it was so.
So you really got an impression
Yeah.
of the man.
Yeah. Yes.
Wonderful. So I think it is important to hear these stories about Jung the man, because
Yes.
one has such an impression of him as almost a superhuman figure.
Superhuman figure, and he wanted to be that, but he did not want to be that, of course. You know, that's really Jung wants and does not want, because the opposites are really, of course, to bring them together somehow, but that is really his main theory, his main thinking of the opposites. So it was very interesting that he wants something, he wants the applause, he wants, it was incredible when he arrived, this idealization. Oh, Professor Jung.
He enjoyed it anyway.
But at the same time he enjoyed it, of course. And he even admitted it, he was quite conscious about
I
it.
think he knew he was a great man, don't you
He
think?
knew, of course, he knew, and he was not, he was, he was greater than Freud. He thought because when Freud left off, he began, that was his idea,
He went further.
Yes, and he was very sad towards the end of his life that he felt he had continued Freud, but they don't want to listen, not enough people want to listen if he would know the success he had afterwards. But at that time he was quite depressed. He said
Everywhere.
Freud and everywhere, and his is not really recognized, especially not by academics.
That was a big problem.
Yeah, and there are many letters of this, and that he really was dissatisfied and depressed towards the end of his life. It's sad, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And don't you think that he also he knew that his psychology somehow was for the future? It wasn't received yet, and there is nowadays a kind of convergence coming. A lot of the new developments in psychoanalysis are not so far from his ideas.
Far at all, and everything which new has always some similarity with Jung's ideas at the time, 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
No?
So now there are new developments in psychoanalysis.
It's approaching Jung, we could say. Of course, they left out this whole religious and mystical and so forth. That is always left out. But his psychological ideas, these ideas about practice and so forth, it gets nearer and nearer. Yeah?
And don't you think the religious part and the spiritual part will come in too
It
slowly?
will come slowly. It
they
will
start coming
come
into
out. It start
psychoanalysis
coming
too.
in. I was at the conference of self-psychology, and they had the whole religious psycho-religious section.
Yeah. So it's beginning to...
Beginning, yes, that they take this serious, because Freud was a religious atheist. I would say religious atheist.
Religious atheist.
It was very
That was his
strong.
religion,
It's
yeah.
religious, yeah.
How many books have you written? What was the first book? How did they unfold?
I mean, the very first book was on the idea of the paradise, longing for paradise.
Longing for Paradise, yeah.
And of course, books, I think if you, the motivation to write books can of course have many different courses and so forth. And for me, usually, if I write a book, it has something to do with my own longings, longing for paradise, longings.
So,
How do I long for paradise? It's true, I had, when I was young, my mother left for Palestine, and I had been raised with an uncle and aunt, and the aunt was a little borderline, and so forth. So the whole idea of paradise and the symbol of it and so forth, it was somehow a longing. It was really affecting me personal, and I don't think so much of the public for what, whether it will be success and whatever and so forth. It's very important that you write something what you feel is up for your own personal life. But then after that, I think was the Transference.
The book on
the book on Transference is the therapeutic relationship, and that was
the therapeutic encounter.
The therapeutic encounter, and that is the book which has most success. I mean, it's about 7 or 8 translations and this little book. But it was actually, there were lectures, and I was always interested in interaction and in intersubjectivity, and it was a great satisfaction to share this with the people who listened, or with people at the institute, with students and so forth. Because one has to say that Jung was great, and he talked a lot about transference. I mean, he did not talk a lot of. He wrote that book.
Yeah.
But that book, I think, is one of the very, very deep and interesting books, The Psychology of Transference. But I think it's more about individuation than about transference. No, it's more the inner.
It's very hard to use that book.
Hard to use. It's more about the inner.
Intrapsychic.
And the other gets forgotten. And that is a little the danger of. I mean, I think that Jung is great, but that part is not really his strong side, or not well developed. And I tried, of course, to bring something in from that side. So it was quite new, it seems, and so forth. So it had a great success, and all these languages and so forth. That was the second book. And the third, I think, was on narcissism.
The narcissism book, yeah.
Narcissism and Jung psychology. When I got to know Kohut, not personally, he was already sick and at the
you didn't
time.
know him. You didn't
I
meet
never
him.
met him. I just saw in psychoanalytic journal sort of works of Kohut. That is really what just agrees with my way of thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
And so I thought, but how is it, and at the same time, it's very, very near to what Jung. No. So I thought,
Even
just
the terminology, the
terminology
self,
and so forth. So I thought it's very interesting and important for me to understand what are the similarities and the differences and the differentiations and also it was connections, and also clinically, because of course Jung had very little clinical material, but Kohut is mainly a clinician. Apart from that, and so it was something which really suited me. Also, I wanted to understand it better, and in order to understand it, you use it to write books, then you have to kind of in a differentiated way to try to understand.
That's a very important book, and for bridging from
It's
the
a
Jungian
bridging
to
exactly
self-psychology. I
to
think that-
self-psychology. For others, for me, it was in the beginning just for me to understand better. And then the third, the fourth, that was on shame.
On shame, yes.
Shame and anxiety. Shame, anxiety. I call it shame, anxiety.
The issue of shame is very much connected to the narcissism
Very
problem.
much connected to the narcissism
Yeah.
problem and to the whole inferiority complex, and you have so many patients, and then the patient I myself also, so I had to somehow to find material and so forth. All these books helped me in my own development and my development on being a therapist and so forth.
Thinking your way ahead
Yes.
through
Yeah.
these books.
Yes. And then the really last one so far, it was when I came across Daniel Stern. Somebody brought me the idea Daniel Stern. It's a must. You have to read Daniel Stern if you are interested in infants and development and so forth. So I did read Daniel Stern. I said, oh, that's also, you can really, that it begins in the baby, the whole process of individuation begins already in the baby. There's so many things which Jung saw, just, had ideas about it and so forth. Now, to really follow it up in the baby, what Stern wrote and so forth, and what others wrote, and the whole science at the time, so that was the last one, and that brought me also a lot of insights into, I think every book I had for myself, the advantage to train myself for more sensitivity for what's going on between two people with the client.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
I'd like to turn this over to Zurich and Dr. Murray Stein and Dr. Mario Jacobi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. We're here in Zurich on a beautiful fall afternoon, and I hope all of you are having as wonderful state of weather conditions as we're having in Zurich today. I want to say before we begin, and I turn this over to Mario Jacobi, I want to say a few words about the four pillars, the concept of the four pillars, to orient you and introduce you to this series. This is a seminar series that is trying to focus on four fundamental elements that are key ingredients of a Jungian approach to psychotherapy and analysis. And the four, which you see up there on the screen now, individuation, therapeutic relationship, dream interpretation, active imagination, are the four focal points that these seminars will look at. We've dealt with the first one, if one could say you could ever deal with that subject of individuation, and as I explained in that session, individuation is a lifelong process of developing one's psychological wholeness to its maximum potential. It's Jung's term for psychological development. It has many phases, it has many aspects to it, and in the analytic process and in the psychotherapeutic process, one tries to become as fully aware as possible of where a particular client or patient is in that developmental process at the moment when they begin analysis, and to track developments along individuation lines that emerge and arise out of the therapeutic process in the course of a long-term psychotherapy. And I mentioned quite a number of features that one looks for in our session last time. Now today we're going to focus on the second of these four pillars, and that has to do with the relationship between the analyst, the therapist, and the client. And this subject is absolutely fundamental to any Jungian discussion of psychotherapy. Many Jungians from many different cultural perspectives have written about this topic by now. And we have with us on this program today one of the leading figures who really is a kind of pioneer after Jung himself in the first generation, a kind of pioneer, especially on this topic of what Mario has called the analytic encounter. And so our focus today is going to be on working in and with the therapeutic relationship as it unfolds, as it develops, as it changes within a long-term psychotherapeutic process. In the next two sessions, we'll be looking at working with material from the unconscious from another angle. You could say that in the transference and in the countertransference, as we'll talk about today, the unconscious also appears. The unconscious emerges in the form sometimes of projections, illusions, dreams, so on. And so we're also working with the unconscious, with unconscious material when we are talking about and dealing with the transference and the countertransference. But more specifically, when we're looking at dreams, working with dreams, interpreting dreams, trying to see what the unconscious is doing with dream figures, we're dealing very directly with unconscious material as it comes in to the therapeutic process. That will be our session next time, and as Steve Buser has said, John Hill will join me in that session, and we will share those 3 hours talking about various aspects of working with dreams in therapy. Also, from Mexico, Patricia Michan is going to introduce another aspect, very important one these days, the cultural level, the cultural background and assumptions and material that come into play in dreams and in dream interpretation. Very important topic of discussion these days when we're speaking so much about cultural differences, cultural assumptions, presuppositions. Nowadays also the cultural complex is a topic of very lively discussion in the Jungian world. So that will be featured in the next session. And then the one after that, we're going to be looking at active imagination, what Jung calls the transcendent function, establishing the transcendent function through working with dreams and active imagination, specifically working with pictures and pictures from the unconscious. And Paul Brucci, who is a specialist in that area, has been teaching the subject for many years at the Jung Institute in Zurich and now at the International School, will be my companion for that discussion on the fourth pillar. I want to also say just very quickly something about the difference between what we're doing in these seminars and what is considered training, a training seminar or a training program. This is not training per se. These are educational seminars, and one should be clear about the distinction. A training is a very highly complex educational program that you enter into when you go to a training institute. For instance, if you come to Zurich and you study at the International School of Analytical Psychology here in Zurich, first of all, you have to apply for the training, you have to be accepted, and then there are three basic aspects to a Jungian training, and they're equally important. There's a personal analysis that all trainees, all candidates have to go through. Then there's a supervision process, individual supervision, and case consultation, working with cases that one has to submit to and participate in. And then there's an educational program of seminars and colloquia, and entailed in all of that and involved in all of that, there are a series of examinations. So that's a training program per se. I don't want anybody to be under the mistaken impression that we're trying to do Jungian training in these seminars. This is an educational program, really quite introductory, I think, but I hope with depth as well, and I hope it will interest some of you in the audience to continue your studies and perhaps even to come to Zurich. You're very welcome here. Be happy to give you information about what we do at the International School, and maybe enter into a training or part of your training, do part of your training in Zurich. As I said last time, there is no place in the world to do Jungian work like Zurich. This is where Jung lived. This is where the very stones in the streets breathe Jungian psychology, if you will. At least that's what I project into those stones. And walking through the streets of Zurich is a very special experience where you feel the history of this place goes way back centuries and centuries, and also more particularly the Jungian flavor of this place that's housed the Jungian enterprise for 100 years now. I'm going to introduce Mario Jacobi to you. I had hoped that you would have seen the short film that we made previous to him coming on and addressing you here, but you'll get to see that later. It was filmed in a very important place for Jungian psychology in Zurich at the Technical University, the AJC, where Jung was a professor, where he lectured and taught for 10 years roughly 10 years from 1933 to 1940. And the reason he's called Professor Jung is that he was a professor at that university. So the interview is filmed on those grounds and in some of the halls there. And when you watch that interview later, if you stay at the end of the program, you will see the surroundings in which Jung walked and actually operated and taught when he was in full swing, really at his peak. I think where his peak years were the 1920s and 30s as a public speaker and professor and teacher. Mario Jacobi is a very, very highly regarded and respected figure in the Jungian world. He's today one of the oldest Jungian analysts still in active practice, to my knowledge. He's certainly the oldest at the International School. He's in his mid-80s and in very fine form. He still is very active in the training program as a training analyst, as a supervising analyst, as a leader of case colloquia, and as a lecturer. And so I first met Mario when I was a student at the Jung Institute back in 1970 or so, and he had recently finished his training and was then beginning to teach and lecture. And in the meantime, he's become a world-class figure. He's lectured all over the world and has trained many analysts. And so he's certainly a very senior figure in the Jungian world. He's also attended every single IAP Congress since they began in 1961. So it's with great pleasure that I'm going to introduce Mario to you. His book, which I can hold up and show the cover to you, is called The Analytic Encounter, Transference, and Human Relationship. Mario published this book in 1984, and it has become a classic in the field. Whenever I teach a course on the therapeutic relationship, transference, countertransference, I recommend that students read this book. So it's become something of a classic in the field, and if not a bestseller in the open market, certainly in Jungian bookstores, it's a constant presence, and many people have read it and learned a lot from it. So we're going to focus on the substance of this book and go out from there. I'm going to turn my chair over to Mario Jacobi now. Let me begin, Mario, by asking you about the subtitle of your book. You say Transference and Human Relationship, the analytic encounter, transference, and human relationship. And I would like to ask you about some of these words in your title. Let's start out with transference and human relationship. How do you see, is there a difference? And how do you get your hands on what that difference might be in the context of a therapeutic relationship?
Yeah, when, let's say, a client comes, wants to have analysis with, or wants therapy and so forth, and he goes and he heard this therapist will be very good and so forth, and he comes and goes, he has not yet a relationship, he may have fantasies already, what that analyst, and what's going to happen, and there is a lot of tension and so forth. And so once he goes, or she goes, and with the time there will be some feelings about this person. One knows he should help me, and all kinds of fantasies will come up from the unconscious. He may even have some similarities to father, mother, or whatever, near relation, brother, and fantasies come up. And those fantasies which come up are based on the unconscious and on the impression of they have outside, let's say outside as an impression, but what we call then those fantasies and those expectations and all what belongs to that is called the transference. Namely, it means transference, there's something from inside the individual, the inside, which is projected on that person, that
Mark,
analyst.
did you have a transference to your analyst when you...
Very strongly, yes.
Can you say something about that?
Yeah, I used to go to Yolanda Jacobi, and Yolanda Jacobi already the same name as I have, and it came out, and not only that she's very much similar to my own mother, because she comes from Hungary, she was Hungarian and Jewish and so forth, and had a bit the temperament of my own mother, who only came originally from Hungary, and so forth, was also very extroverted and sort of vain of herself, her beauty and all this, and so was Yolanda. Yolanda was kind, and it's not only, I thought it's my transference, but many other persons told me, oh, this analyst of yours, I mean, she doesn't look like your mother, but she's the same type, you know.
So did you have similar reactions to her as you had to your mother? How did transference come into play there?
Transference came in the sense that I had also dreams about her, that she was just wonderful. She was teaching Khrushchev at the time, you know, it was at that time in Khrushchev, or she was a very, very wise woman, what my mother was not, but her way of speaking, her way of being a little vain and little wanting to be beautiful and so forth, and the Hungarian accent and so forth was very, well, reminded me on the mother. And of course I knew at the same time, my mind knew that she has some superficiality in her, you know, she is a very extroverted woman, yet in the unconscious she was very wise and someone who had some what we call numinous quality for me. So on the mind I knew she's superficial, I should not bring certain things. She was very nosy, very sort of full in life. And from the inside she was very attractive, I thought I could learn a lot from her, and also kind of leaning on her a little bit like I had done with my mother before.
And did you develop a human relationship with her as well? Would you say there was a moment when that shifted?
Yes, yes. Because she always looked for that there's a human relationship. She called when she wanted to be driven somewhere, you know, or when she wanted, yeah, how are you? Or come over. And she had always her boys around her, some colleagues, and for it was a tradition, every Christmas, the second day of Christmas, one had to go to her, and she invited the ones who had no partners, we were 4 boys, her sons, but I was, because I had the same name, and she always felt, yeah, but you have just, you're success because you have my name, you know, that was a kind of spirit, but like this, she always tried to there was not, today there is this difference very, very much. You have this way of not mix any privacy, any social contact and so forth with the analytic hour. Yeah. It would take away, and of course I learned also more to do this, because with her at that time one didn't was not so
right.
important.
Well, today we speak a lot about the frame.
The frame,
and how do analysts of your generation feel about the frame? Because in the group, you know, that's been trained, I would say since the 1980s, 90s for sure, frame became almost the hallmark, the god of analysis, and not to break the frame, and not to act out or enact, and when you describe the way analysis was done before that, it seems very different.
Very, very, very different. Of course, I still feel I don't want. There's so many things I learned from Yolande, what I thought I never will do this kind of things, because I knew that it can be a little damaging. For instance, she came when I asked her, how are you, Frau Doctor? I am so tired and so forth. I said, I never will tell my patients that I feel tired today, because then you thought as a patient to her, now she's so tired, how can you now still sort of getting heavy things on her, and she will be too tired to listen and so forth. So it has damaging, but now that was what I thought. I don't want to tell patients, but later on patients come, oh, you look quite tired today. No.
Yes.
So, but the whole frame, I think it's overdone a lot with this frame. I think it's very important to have a frame to in order, but I feel the frame has mainly to do that on one hand you can be very spontaneous, as Jung himself was. Jung didn't have much frame, by the way, but you know, as Jung was, as Yolande, you can be quite spontaneous. It's important you can be natural, spontaneous and so forth. Yet what is important, you should never lose the consciousness about that, after all, you are there for the other, for your client. You are there, whatever you do, whatever you say, and so forth, has always an impact on the other, and you should not forget the other, and sometimes the danger is, of course, of this openness and so forth, that you make you talk about your stuff to the client instead of the other way, because their client, how are you, and so forth, and they love this partly, and partly, of course, not, but it's so important. In the center of your attention is always the client.
Now, that brings up the subject of countertransference.
Yes.
And would you say that if you are spontaneous in your sessions, there's a danger that you might be speaking from countertransference reactions
Yeah.
and acting from countertransference
Yeah.
reactions. So
Yeah.
how do you sort that out?
Yes, I may do this, and of course countertransference is now, since already many centuries, some
Decades, yeah.
decades ago, one saw, of course, in the 50s, that countertransference is not something which should be avoided or is bad and so forth. Countertransference, there is a so-called that you feel through what you feel in the so-called countertrans, you feel always things which may happen in the analysand. I think of one example. I had a client. She came one day and said, I don't know anymore whether I dreamt this or but I have some funny ideas and so forth. I don't know whether I dreamt it. I heard myself say, of course you know the difference between the dreams and the conscious reactions. Of course you know that. And then she fell into silence. I fell into silence. I said, why do I talk like this to her? Because of course I was a little afraid if she does not know this difference, then there is a beginning psychosis or something like this, because, And so I was sitting there, she was sitting there, in a very bad thing. I thought, why do I talk to her as her mother would talk or her parents would talk? I don't know this in myself, that especially with this tone. And slowly she came out that, now you talk to me like my mother used to talk to me. And I had already before the thing, I talked like a mother or father and so forth, and that was very good. I could then say, yeah, I thought exactly the same. At the time you thought this, I felt this also. But now, I think it's what importance I have some kind of inner idea or so how your mother used to be to you and you to your mother. And that can be through countertransference and so forth.
So it isn't. It's what you do with it after it's happened.
Yeah, yeah.
How
That
you
was important.
Yeah.
Yes, that I somehow, because I had actually, it was very astonishing to me, but I felt already I do that. What I'm doing to her saying this,
Something
and
unusual, yeah.
unusual. But of course, the other kind of countertransference for what you were mentioning, that it is, of course, that your own needs and your own fantasies and your own projections and so forth are getting on the client. And of course, I think, why do we have to make such a long training?
Talk louder, I think.
Louder?
Yeah, so they can hear you better. Yeah.
Why do we have to do such a long training?
Yeah.
It has a lot to do with getting aware and conscious of our own kind of differences, neurotic streaks and so forth, that you know about them and can more and more, you are never completely aware, but can be aware and sensitized in a certain sense, that when you say certain things in the practice and to your client, somehow having a feeling, where does it come from that I have now this reaction?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, in your book, you mention the psychoanalyst Racker.
Yes.
I think he was Argentinian or Brazilian,
Yes,
South
yes,
American.
yes.
And Racker wrote about these two different kinds of countertransference. How did you come into contact with Racker's writings, and why did you introduce that into your work as a Jungian analyst?
Yes. I read about Recker first time in the Journal of Analytical Psychology, where Michael Fordham from London, they were very specialized in transference and counter-transference and so forth. There I read a very, very good critique and about Recker. I thought I have to read this record because it's something quite new, very differentiated and so forth. And Fordham, who was a specialist in transference, he really praised it tremendously and so forth. And so I read that, and that was a real eye-opener for a lot of differentiation within this enormously complex field of especially counter-transference for what you do.
Yeah, yeah. And how was that received in the Jungian circles here in Zurich? If you step outside the collected works and the writings of the immediate disciples of Jung, how does...
Yeah, it was of course I gave also lectures. I gave lectures on Neumann and also, Neumann was still a Jungian, but also on Recker and later of Kohut and Winnicott and of course it was said that you are a Freudian.
Yeah.
Some people didn't like it, of course, but most of them, because I always referred to Jung, I always saw it from the standpoint of Jung, also in my books and so forth. It's always, I compare it with Jung and try, Jung is the center, and try to have more combinations and so forth. And I felt myself, I am a Jungian, that's my center, but I want to be open to whatever the client brings, and to understand more. And what's also interesting until today, you read the newest, what comes about the interaction and the intersubjectivity and so forth. It's now very, very much in, but there are so many things what Jung said 60 years ago.
Yes.
But it was not followed.
Yeah, and it wasn't very differentiated very far. Jung said many things, but then I think your work has really picked up on those things and brought in other thinkers who follow pretty much along maybe similar lines, but are more differentiated in their exploration.
They're clinically more differentiated, yet if I then add from the Jungian point of view, there's always more depth in it, and some background which is left out there. But I think it's a very important thing to get also more to the personal, their personal different difficulties and so forth. From the archetype. Archetype is something very, very so-called collective, and everyone it's something very deep in us and collective, but there are hundreds and thousands of ways how those archetypal ways and roots and so forth are in the person.
Now, Kohut's writings and some of his followers, you've become, I know, close friends with some of the self-psychologists, but Kohut's writings, also some references to Kohut in this early book. What has been the most important value from studying Kohut for you in terms of transference issues, transference and counter-transference issues?
But Kohut describes, the whole work of Kohut has really to do with the transference and with the relationship and so forth, and he describes very, very in a differentiated and detailed way things like the self-object, self-object and the self-object transference. And you see, but Jung talked about this, but not in this clinical, differentiated
yeah.
way.
Yeah,
It was so much what
The
Jung talked
idealizing
about.
transference.
Yeah.
And really, Coet would touch on the archetypal, I suppose.
Also, but he
elements.
never called it archetypal,
that, yeah.
because that is he only had in the whole cohort. There's one reference on Jung in a on how you call this
Footnote.
Footnote. Then he said, yeah, Jung was a very a figure who had a lot of not mana personality, didn't know this word, but a lot of he was a charismatic person. You cannot even use him therefore for he thinks for the all day for the ordinary practice.
And in your I mean, in the Jungian field, you're famous for bridging. I mean, no one, I think, has seriously questioned your fundamental Jungian approach and commitment, but you have bridged to many other schools and in your writings have compared and contrasted. What do you think is the most basic difference between a Jungian understanding of the transference, countertransference, and the psychoanalytic ones?
Yes, I mean the Jungians are of course very, very geared to the archetype, the collective, basic, and it comes from Jung that Jung doesn't seem to have been interested in personal methods. He was bored with it. He writes himself about this, and Yolanda told me this. If you didn't bring an archetypal dream, he did send you to one of his pupils and so forth. And he said also in the memory strange reflections, he says he gets bored if it's just the everyday kind of little kind of worries and whatever issues and so forth. And now what's the question?
Yeah, so the archetypal is different, but I think
The archetype
also,
is very
what
different.
about the idea of that the transference has some meaning, perspective meaning?
Yes.
At this point,
I think that is it's interesting that Kohu took that up.
Oh, he did.
Yeah, he did. And there is a forward edge, he called it, or they call it forward edge of the interpretation of transference. And that would mean what Jung's ideas that transference is not just a repetition, as the Freudians used to say, that has a forward edge, a meaning, and somehow
Developmentally important.
A goal,
Going somewhere.
Yeah.
Now, you told me a number of times, I've heard this story, I think this audience would be interested in hearing it, your personal meeting with Jung. You met him once or twice, I think, and can you just share with...
Yes, I did not meet him, in his practice. He was very old when I got to the institute. He was and he was sick, and he never appeared. Only his pupils. And Jung said, I heard always indirectly what Jung said, and so forth. And one day it was said that now Jung is healthy enough. He wants now to come and have a discussion afternoon with the students. And they were. And of course everybody came, and the analysts came. There were four or five training analysts, and I realized that when Jung comes in, of course, as big professor and so forth. But also, I felt they're very shy. Our big training analysts, very shy and fearful.
Fearful of him.
Yeah. And so I thought. Of course, I was very, very fascinated. Now Jung had the fantasy he was sitting there, and I had the fantasy of now there is this man who is sitting there, but his feet and his always goes down very, very, very deep in, in the thing. And he was old, of course, and he didn't have a voice, but you had the feeling this voice, although it had not, it spreads all over, and incredible mana and luminosity and so forth. And so it was, of course, my question, do I project this?
Yeah.
Or does it really come from him? But also I felt that I'm glad not to have to go to him in the ordinary analysis, because he takes the whole space and you try to adapt to him, and he doesn't seem to adapt to the client, because usually the client has the say, but I don't think that Jung could, even if he wanted, he just had this kind of radiance around him.
Yeah. And what did he say on that occasion to the students? Did he give a lecture or answer questions?
No,
Or?
he wanted to have a discussion afternoon, but you had, for this, you had to write him already the question. I remember, it goes too long if I some details I still remember, but it would be too long now
But it was an unforgettable experience for you to
It was
actually be in his
unforgettable
presence.
experience of his presence, and another thing I can, one day there was I used to have a duo. I was violinist with Dora Kalf, who played the piano. And one day it was said, one should talk in the Jung club, play for Jung, or do something that Jung gets entertained and so forth. So to make a long story short, it was a long thing whether the club is something the initiated ones, and I was only student and so forth, but Frau Kalb said she could not, she only can play with me because she doesn't want to be solo. We played, and then it was said, and Jung is musical, but he's oversensitive. And if Beethoven, so it would be too much for his thing, only something which does not move him so much, and so many things you've got to hear what to do if you meet Jung with your violin. Yeah. So we decided to try Tartini and Vivaldi and so forth. And of course then I came in, because I said I don't come to the meal, because the meal is something, from outside I don't come to the meal, I just come and play for him, because I thought I can then tell my children and children's children that once I had played to Jung, now I tell it to you. Anyhow, I play, I had one little eye to see how Jung reacts. He was sitting there very, very quietly, attentive and so forth. And afterwards he came and shook my hand and said, I liked it and so forth, but then he left, and that was a fear that he would leave, because he left. Next day I come to Yolanda Jacobi. She was also not invited because she was too outspoken for this club, not invited. And she said, I heard bad things about Frau Kalf, about you I didn't hear anything, but about Frau Kalf, because she took 20 minutes of Jung's attention and just on her, because she played there, and the others couldn't get in touch with Jung. So they were incredibly envious of Jung. And so my thing was, maybe envy may belong to individuation. I don't know. I was disappointed that about this reaction, but on totality, individuation, so envy may also belong there.
One final question, Mario, before we open up to the audience for questions. You've been practicing for many years now. Do you still enjoy analytic work?
Yes. Yeah.
And how has it changed for you? How is it for you nowadays that might be different from what it was when you were younger?
Yes, I think I have less fear of the patients. In the beginning you think of now they bring the dreams I don't understand and all this. When you just begin, you should understand the dream, exactly everything and so forth. I'm now, of course, I'm much more kind of nice to myself and be open and allow myself all the mistakes I do.
That you still enjoy
still
the
enjoy,
hours.
Yeah. And I think that's important.
That's very important.
Yeah.
I think so. Because your patients know if you're enjoying or not. I think. Now we're going to. I'm going to move over here, and you stay there.
Yeah.
And we'll ask for questions from the audience. We're going to go first to Chicago.
Yeah.
Please comment on how Jung and Kohut complement each other.
Yes. Jung said at one place, I think, the theories are the very devil of our profession. And so in reality, of course, for the book, I try to make those differences and so forth. And I learned a lot about it and so forth. But in reality, with sitting with a patient, I try to stay open, and whatever comes from the material and from the presence of the patient into my mind may be a more Kohutian idea, or maybe a Jungian idea, or maybe Winnicott, or whatever. I don't, maybe after I have interpreted or after I have reacted, so it may come to my mind, that was like Kohut, or that was more, or that was really classical Jung or von Franz or whatever. So I feel it is very important just to be open. I do these books, I wrote this book because I was interested in how this combination is, because I felt very, for me, it was very important to learn a lot about subtleties in dealing with transference, dealing with the client and so forth, by integrating also Kohut into the Jungian ideas, which are not so far away. They are very near. Also, Kohut does not have the depth and does not have the religious side and so forth. But for the clinical side, you learn a lot, and it combines itself.
Please say something about affect attunement in the therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important issues in analysis, of whatever kind. Of course, Kohut talked about the empathy, affect attunement, and Stern brought up from the infant research, and affect attunement is of course that you feel the atmosphere which the client is in, what is important, what the conflict. You feel things which, what is also behind the words. He tells you.
Tune into the emotional.
It's affect. It's the emotional, the sensitivity on the emotional interaction, emotional side of the interaction. And the attunement is, of course, that you get into that. No.
I think your point that Mario has been a significant figure in bridging to these new developments within psychoanalysis. I mean, he's one of our bridge builders, probably the foremost bridge builder, certainly in Zurich, to these other schools that, in a way, we see as converging in many respects to some Jungian ideas, of some of Jung's ideas.
Please comment on Kohut's notion of the forward edge of transference and how it relates to Jungian thought.
The forward edge.
Yeah, forward. The forward edge, they mean, I think it has a lot to do with Jung's idea. What does a transference somehow aim at? It's not that the repetition because it,
Prospective, yeah.
it's a perspective. I think it's,
Yeah.
I think the forward edge would be the prospective side of Thank You, Maria. Yeah. It was what Jungians call the prospective.
So the idea is that the unconscious has that the unconscious has an intention
Yeah.
in producing
Yes.
certain projections,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
they're moving along a line
Yes.
toward individuation.
Yes. And that was not in the Freudian thing was not yet. Huh?
Glenn, do you want to say something else?
Please give an example of a negative countertransference from your own practice.
Yes. Of course, I mean, Winnicott wrote also of the hate of your patient, hate of your client. There are certain, how shall I say, there exists something like negative countertransference, in a sense that you, and how to handle it I mean, first of all, you have to forgive yourself that you feel like that of your patient, because you are trained you should love your patient, you know. And if you hate your patient or certain things in your patient, first you have to forgive yourself in a way for it, but try to understand what is behind it. And of course, that is very difficult. That is a very difficult thing, how to, whether what you tell your patients, to what extent you can tell your patient without offending him or her too much, but you get into a certain conflict between the honesty you owe your client and, of course, and the
Sensitivity for their
the
feelings.
sensitivity for the
Does a particular case come to mind where you had a strong negative countertransference reaction?
yeah, you repress these kind of cases, but I know it comes.
You've had,
No.
well, maybe there are certain moments in a case. It isn't that you hate the person, but there's something they say that reminds you of somebody or of another situation, or
No, I had one person. She was always full of envy,
envy.
and also we analyzed this and so forth and so forth. She always is envy. She was a very, very gifted person, gifted analyst. She was even a therapist, and but how shall I say, this envy was something which always came, and never you couldn't, whatever you did, that envy was always still there. And so I really didn't like this person to come, and you couldn't do much with it, and so forth. So,
And did you get past it, or what happened?
she, unfortunately, I have now to say that she died not long ago, and I went to visit her sometimes, and the amazing thing is in this, she had a long sort of being in the hospital, and so on. And in this period, I began to like her because she developed incredibly on her deathbed.
On her deathbed.
Huh?
Maybe she accepted herself in
Yes,
her own life
yes,
more.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
How does the body play a role in the countertransference?
Did you get that, Mario? That,
Not
that
quite.
the somatic,
Yes.
your somatic reactions.
My somatic reaction.
Inform you of something.
Yes,
Inform you.
yes.
Part of the countertransference.
It's a part of the
information.
countertransference. Yes,
Yeah.
That is the question.
Yeah, that's the question.
Whether-
And how you read it, what you do with it, maybe how you. Is it? Would it be a complementary countertransference? Would it be? How would you take it? Neurotic
it
could
all-
be a neurotic countertransference.
It all depends how I feel. I mean, I cannot give general answer to
Yeah.
this, but of course you can feel very, very different things, and there is always the question: is it the part to be shared with the client, or is it a part just only for myself to be? That's always the question, and that's the art of analysis therapy is, of course, to feel to what extent things are shared in all honesty and so forth, and what is in a way better for certain reasons, not at the moment not to be shared.
Well, in your work with training candidates and doing supervision, how would you work with a somatic reaction? Suppose a candidate reported that they had
Yeah.
a strong somatic reaction
Yes.
with one of their clients.
Yes. Of course, I would then go in. What are her associations to it? I mean, I would mainly try to get what was accompanying this in the
countertransference.
in the countertransference.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So in specific cases, you have very specific material to work with and
Yes, of course.
associations
It's very difficult
to generalize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole thing is very, very difficult to generalize because the individual situation is always different, and it's important to have sensitivity to the individual. I think, why did Jung say the theories are the very devil? Because he wanted to have the individual,
Yeah.
that because every individual has its way where individuation, if you call it that, is of course working in different individuals in a different way, although the archetypes are collective.
Okay. Well, I think, Mario, we want to thank you very much for participating in this, and I'm sure your audiences, everybody out there.
Okay. What a new experience for me. Also.
Your experience, right? And we will continue in just a minute, okay? Okay.